When I first heard about Auranopithecus,
Climate
I
pressures
thought it was
forced
just
species
another
like
strange
this to
name in a long
adapt
list of
or
ancient
vanish.
creatures. But the more I listened, the more I
But
felt
this
like this
seemingly
ape had
ordinary
something
ape
very important to
represents a
tell us.
branch that shaped
Some
our own
people even
beginnings.
whisper that maybe, just maybe, the story
Many
of humanity
scientists see
itself
these
begins with
creatures as
this
the first
mysterious ape.
hominins, not
I
direct
imagine
descendants
myself
of
sitting on the steps
Auranopithecus, but
outside my house, looking up at the night
As the
sky
sun
while
climbs
telling this
higher,
story.
the group
The
moves through
stars above
scattered
look so
acacia
ancient,
trees.
and it feels right to talk about something
Survival
that goes
relied
back
not just on
millions of
strength,
years.
but on ingenuity, a defining
Auranopithecus
step
wasn't
that
a little
separated
monkey that
humans from
swung through
earlier
trees
apes
like
like
you see in
Auranopithecus.
cartoons. He was big, strong, and had a face that looked almost human. If you saw him, you might pause for a moment and wonder, was he an ape or something closer to us? That's the puzzle scientists have been chasing. He lived about 9 million years ago. That's so long ago that even the oldest pyramids are just a blink compared to it. Back then, the Earth was different. Forests stretched far across Europe and Asia, rivers carved their paths freely, and strange animals walked the land. Some were familiar, like early deer, and some were odd, like giant rhinos bigger than cars. And somewhere in those forests, Auranopithecus climbed, foraged, and survived. What makes him so interesting isn't just his size or shape, it's the idea that he might be linked to us. People argue about this a lot. Some scientists think Auranopithecus could be one of the very first ancestors that started the long road toward humans. Others say no, he was just another ape that vanished. But either way, he left behind fossils that still spark questions today. The fossils were first found in Greece, and later in parts of the Balkans. Imagine that for a second. Most people think of early human ancestors living only in Africa. But here was an ape, huge and powerful, living in southern Europe. His jaws were wide and strong, made for crushing tough plants and maybe even hard nuts. His face was flat in some ways, not pushed forward like many apes today. When I picture him, I see a creature that looks like a mix, not fully human, not fully like a modern gorilla, but something right in between. Now, you might wonder why he matters so much. After all, there were many apes in the past. But Auranopithecus appeared during a special time in history, the Miocene epoch. That was the age of apes, when dozens of different kinds lived all over the world. Some swung in the trees, some walked on branches like tightropes, and some started testing the ground. It was almost like nature was experimenting, trying out different designs. Out of that long experiment, one path eventually led to us. Scientists look at tiny details in bones to figure this out. For example, the size of teeth, the angle of jaws, or even the wear on molars can tell a story. Auranopithecus had large, thick teeth. That means he was probably eating hard, fibrous food. It also means he lived in areas where soft fruits weren't always available, maybe drier regions with tougher plants. That matches with the landscapes of Greece back then, which were beginning to shift from dense forests to more open woodlands. And here's something even more exciting: some researchers believe that as forests shrank in Europe, apes like Auranopithecus had to adapt. They might have come down from the trees more often, searched for food on the ground, and faced new challenges. Doesn't that sound familiar? Humans later did the same, learning to walk upright and survive on open land. Could it be that Auranopithecus was already taking the first tiny steps toward that way of life? I sometimes imagine a scene, a group of Auranopithecus apes moving carefully through a clearing. The sun is hot, and the trees are fewer than before. They pause near a bush with hard fruits. One of them cracks it open with strong jaws. Another looks around nervously, scanning for predators. For a brief moment, they stand taller, peering across the grass. That simple act of standing, even just to look, could have been one of the sparks that led, millions of years later, to us walking on two legs. But of course, this is still debated. Many scientists argue that Auranopithecus was just a cousin, not a direct ancestor. They say the true beginnings of humanity were in Africa, not Europe. And they might be right. Still, The fossils don't lie. Auranopithecus was there, and he was unlike many others. Another reason he fascinates me is the mystery of disappearance. Around 7 million years ago, apes in Europe started to vanish. Climate was changing. Forests gave way to grasslands, and many animals couldn't adapt. Did Auranopithecus die out completely, leaving no descendants? Or did some of his kind wander farther south, crossing into Africa, blending into the story of early human ancestors? No one knows for sure. But the thought that he could be part of our hidden past makes his fossils feel like whispers from long ago. When scientists first studied his skulls, they were shocked by how big his face and jaws were. Some even thought they belonged to giant gorillas. But the more they compared, the more they noticed details that looked closer to humans. That's why debates about him have lasted for decades. Each new fossil sparks arguments in journals, conferences, and classrooms. It's almost like Auranopithecus is still alive in a way, forcing us to keep asking who we are and where we came from. What I love most about this story is how small things like a broken tooth or a piece of jaw can carry so much meaning. Imagine scientists kneeling in the dirt, brushing away layers of soil, and suddenly seeing something shiny. At first, it looks like a rock, but then they realize it's a tooth that hasn't seen the sun in 9 million years. That moment must feel magical, like holding a time machine in your hand. And from that tooth, they piece together entire lives. They imagine what Auranopithecus ate, how he moved, how he raised his young, how he survived dry seasons. Every fossil is like a puzzle piece, and slowly the picture forms. But it's never complete. There are always gaps, and maybe that's why the story is so captivating. It leaves room for wonder. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if Auranopithecus could see us now. He would see humans with tall buildings, glowing screens, airplanes in the sky. Would he recognize us as family? Or would he tilt his head, confused, seeing only strange creatures so far from the forest life he knew? Even though he lived so long ago, there's something comforting about knowing we share the earth with creatures that came before us. They remind us that humanity didn't appear suddenly. It was a slow journey, step by step, ancestor by ancestor. And maybe, just maybe, one of those steps began with this great ape in Greece. That's why the story of Auranopithecus matters. He isn't just a fossil in a museum. He's a clue, a chapter in the giant book of life. And if we listen closely, his bones might still be telling us that the origins of humanity are more surprising, more mysterious, and more connected than we ever imagined. When I close my eyes, I imagine the scientists who first found the fossils of Auranopithecus. The air in Greece must have been warm, the soil dry, and the sun bright above them. They weren't looking for treasure made of gold or silver. What they found was far more valuable pieces of a forgotten world. The first discovery happened in the 1970s, when researchers uncovered fossilized jaws and teeth in northern Greece. At first, they didn't know exactly what they were holding. The fossils looked different from anything they had seen before. The teeth were large, thick, and flat, almost like they were made for crushing the toughest food. And the jaws were massive. Whoever this creature was, it had the strength to bite through things most animals would avoid. The scientists named it Auranopithecus macedonensis. The name sounds big and heavy, and it fits. Aurano means heaven in Greek, though no one is exactly sure why it was chosen. Pithecus means ape. Together, the name means something like heavenly ape. When I first heard that, I thought it sounded almost magical, as if this ape had been sent from the skies to guard the secrets of our past. The fossils told a story right away. They showed that Auranopithecus was not a small, fragile animal. He was strong, maybe even bigger than a chimpanzee, with a wide face and strong cheekbones. His brow ridge was heavy, like a shadow over his eyes. If you saw him sitting quietly in the shade, you might think he looked oddly serious, as if he was always thinking about something. But the most surprising thing wasn't just how he looked. It was where he was found. Until then, most people thought the cradle of humanity's ancestors was only in Africa. But here was a powerful ape in Europe, living millions of years before the first true humans appeared. This discovery shook the scientific world. Could it be that some of the first steps toward humanity happened in Europe instead of Africa? Of course, not everyone agreed. Some scientists argued that Australopithecus was only a relative, not a true ancestor. But even if that was the case, his existence showed something very important: apes weren't only surviving in Africa. They were spread out, trying to adapt to many different environments. And adaptation is the key to survival. The teeth especially fascinated researchers. They weren't just for decoration, they told the story of diet, environment, and daily life. Strong molars like those of Australopithecus meant he was eating hard, fibrous foods. Maybe tree bark, roots, or tough fruits that grew in drier climates. That gave scientists a clue about what Greece looked like back then. It wasn't just lush jungle. It was becoming more open, with fewer soft fruits and more difficult plants. I like to picture a small group of Australopithecus apes gathered around a tree. They pick at the tough pods hanging from its branches. One of them cracks a nut with his jaw, while another searches for leaves. A baby clings to its mother's fur, watching with wide eyes as she chews carefully. Around them, the air is filled with the calls of birds, and in the distance, other animals roam: ancient horses, antelopes, and even the heavy footsteps of a huge rhinoceros. It must have been a world full of noise, smells, and danger. The fossils of Australopithecus are rare. Only a few skull fragments, jaws, and teeth have been found. That means we don't know everything about him. But sometimes, mystery makes the story even stronger. Every time a new piece is discovered, it feels like a whisper from the past, as if Australopithecus is saying, "Don't forget me. I was here. I mattered." When the fossils were first studied, some scientists thought they looked similar to gorillas. Others thought they looked closer to humans. The truth is, they share features with both. That's what makes them so fascinating. They sit in between, a bridge across time, connecting the ape world to something that feels closer to us. But there's another twist. Fossils of Australopithecus weren't only found in Greece. Later, remains were also uncovered in Turkey and possibly other parts of the Balkans. That suggests this ape roamed a wide area, moving across lands that were very different from today. Back then, the Mediterranean wasn't the same sea we know now. The land was shifting, climates were changing, and the world itself seemed restless. This was the late Miocene epoch, about 9 million years ago. It was a time of transition. Forests that once covered much of Europe were shrinking. Open grasslands were spreading. Animals had to change with the land, or they would vanish. Australopithecus, with his strong jaws and ability to eat tough foods, seemed built for survival. But even strength and adaptation aren't always enough. That's another reason the fossils feel so powerful. They remind us how fragile life can be. Even the strongest apes couldn't escape the forces of nature forever. Around 7 million years ago, Australopithecus disappeared. We don't know exactly why. Maybe the climate shifted too quickly. Maybe competition from other animals was too strong. Or maybe his descendants simply changed so much over time that they became something entirely new. There's a quiet sadness in that. To think of a whole species vanishing, leaving behind only silent bones. But there's also hope. Because even in disappearance, Australopithecus may have left behind a legacy that still lives inside us today. One thing I find really interesting is how scientists debate these fossils. Some argue loudly that Australopithecus is a direct ancestor of humans. Others insist he was only a side branch that died out. The truth is, we may never know for sure. Fossils don't always give us clear answers. Sometimes they give us questions, and those questions make us look deeper. I imagine being one of those scientists in the field. You spend days digging under the hot sun, dust covering your clothes. You find broken rocks, dried roots, and tiny pieces of bones. Hours pass, and nothing seems special. But then suddenly you see a shape in the soil. You brush it gently, and your heart races. A tooth, still sharp after millions of years, stares back at you. In that moment, it feels like time folds, and you are touching a creature that lived before humans even existed. That's the magic of fossils, they connect us to the deep past in a way nothing else can. Auranopithecus may never be as famous as dinosaurs or cavemen, but his story is just as important. He lived at a crossroads in history, a time when apes were exploring new ways of surviving, testing the limits of their bodies and environments. He was part of the great experiment of life, and without apes like him, maybe humans would never have appeared. As I think about his fossils, I realize they are more than bones. They are messages. They tell us about resilience, about the struggle to survive, and about the mystery of origins. And every time I hear his name, Auranopithecus, I feel a shiver, like I'm standing in front of a door to the past, waiting for it to open. When I think about the world of Auranopithecus, I try to picture not just the ape himself but everything around him. It wasn't only about his strong jaws or his wide face. It was about the land he lived in, the other animals that walked beside him, and the way the earth was changing beneath his feet. His story isn't just one of fossils, it's also the story of an entire world in motion. The time was the late Miocene epoch, about 9 million years ago. Imagine stepping into that world. The air would feel heavier, the sun sharper, and the land different from anything we know today. Greece, where his fossils were found, wasn't covered with the crowded cities or quiet beaches we see now. Instead, it was a mix of woodlands, open patches of grass, and scattered rivers. Forests were shrinking. For millions of years, apes had thrived in thick jungles, swinging from branch to branch, eating soft fruits, and living where shade was endless. But during the late Miocene, the climate was changing. Rainfall lessened. Trees grew farther apart. The land grew drier. For apes like Auranopithecus, this was both a danger and an opportunity. In these new landscapes, the animals were changing too. Horses were not like the ones we see today. They were smaller, still adjusting to life on open plains. Antelopes grazed in herds, always alert for predators. Huge rhinos, some bigger than trucks, lumbered across the land. Even elephants were there, but they weren't the same elephants we know now. They had different shapes, some with shorter trunks or straighter tusks. And then there were the predators. Big cats, hyenas, and even strange bear-like creatures hunted in the shadows. For an ape like Auranopithecus, danger was everywhere. He had no sharp claws or fangs like those predators. His strength was his mind, his social bonds, and his ability to adapt. That's why his story feels so close to ours. We, too, had to survive by being clever rather than strong. I imagine a scene, a small group of Auranopithecus apes walking slowly through tall grass. They move together, because alone they would be too easy a target. One carries a baby on her back. Another scans the horizon, pausing now and then to stand a little taller, peering across the field. The sun burns hot, but the promise of food drives them forward. In the distance, they spot a cluster of trees. Relief washes over them. Shade, safety, and maybe fruit. But as they draw closer, a rustle in the grass makes them freeze. Their hearts pound. Is it just the wind? Or is it a predator waiting? That moment of stillness tells us so much about their world. Every step had to be careful. Every meal was a risk. Life wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. And yet, somehow, they managed. The way scientists know this isn't from stories passed down, but from clues hidden in the ground. Fossils of plants show what kinds of trees and grasses grew back then. Fossils of animals show what kinds of creatures roamed the same lands. When researchers put these pieces together, they paint a picture of an ecosystem full of giants and shadows, where Auranopithecus had to find his place. And his place wasn't at the top of the food chain. Unlike predators, he couldn't hunt large animals. Unlike grazing herds, he couldn't run fast across open plains. Instead, he found a balance between the trees and the ground. He could climb when he needed safety, forage on the ground when food was scarce, and use his strong jaws to eat what others couldn't. That ability to adjust to find new ways of living was perhaps his greatest strength. But there's another layer to this. During the late Miocene, Europe itself was becoming less welcoming to apes. For millions of years, apes had spread widely across the continent. But as forests disappeared, many of them vanished too. Auranopithecus was one of the last to remain. He lived at the edge of a turning point in history, when Europe's apes were slowly disappearing. That gives his fossils a special meaning. They represent the end of an age. Some scientists think that as Europe grew harsher, apes like Auranopithecus may have tried to move southward, toward Africa, where forests were still more stable. If that happened, then his kind may not have truly vanished. They may have blended into the story of African apes and, in time, into the story of humanity itself. But again, not everyone agrees. Some argue he was a side branch, unique to Europe, that left no descendants. Still, the idea that his footsteps might have echoed all the way to Africa makes me wonder. Imagine an Auranopithecus slowly traveling, generation after generation, across shifting lands, following rivers, crossing valleys, until one day his descendants found themselves in Africa. There, surrounded by new challenges and opportunities, the long journey toward humans could have truly begun. It's like a riddle with no final answer. But maybe that's what makes it so captivating. What fascinates me even more is how much of this story is still hidden. Fossils are rare. Sometimes, entire species are known only from a single jaw or skull. That means we're trying to rebuild an entire world from just fragments. It's almost like looking at a puzzle where most of the pieces are missing. But even with those missing pieces, the image of Auranopithecus shines through an ape at the edge of change, living in a world that was shifting beneath him. And it wasn't only the land that was changing, it was also the climate. Scientists studying rocks and sediments from that time have found evidence of cooling trends. The Earth was beginning to move toward the ice ages that would come much later. Temperatures dropped, rainfall patterns shifted, and animals had to keep up. For Auranopithecus, that meant learning to survive with less fruit, less forest, and more open land. That's why his teeth were so important. They were like survival tools, built to handle tough plants. They told the story of an ape that could endure when others failed. And in that way, he reminds me of humans. We, too, survived not because we were the biggest or fastest, but because we could eat many kinds of food, live in many kinds of places, and keep going even when the world changed. Sometimes, when I think about Auranopithecus, I don't just see an ape. I see a survivor. A creature standing at the edge of forests, looking out at grasslands, unsure but willing to take the risk. And maybe, deep in that ancient hesitation, lies the first spark of what would one day become us. The world he lived in may be gone now, replaced by cities, seas, and roads. But his story remains, written in fossils and dust, waiting for us to listen. And every time a new bone is uncovered, the story grows richer, as if the world of giants and shadows is whispering back to life. Every time I hear the name Auranopithecus, I can't help but think of arguments. Not the kind you hear in a schoolyard, with kids shouting and pointing fingers, but the quiet, careful arguments of scientists, made in books, papers, and conferences. And yet, even though they're calm and polite, the debates are just as fierce. The question is simple: was Auranopithecus part of our family tree, or not? You'd think fossils would give us a clear answer. But the truth is, fossils are like half-told stories. You read a page here, a page there, and the rest is missing. That's why scientists spend years debating what each bone means. And Auranopithecus, with his strong jaws and unusual face, has kept the debates alive for decades. Some scientists look at him and say, yes, here is an early ancestor of humans. They point out that his facial features seem closer to ours than those of gorillas or chimpanzees. His flat face, his wide jaws, even the way his teeth are shaped, these, they argue, are hints that he wasn't just another ape. He was something more, something connected to the long line that eventually led to us. But others shake their heads. No, they argue, Auranopithecus was only a cousin, not an ancestor. They point out that while he has some similarities to humans, he also shares traits with other apes. They warn that looks can be deceiving, that evolution isn't a straight ladder but a tangled tree with many branches. Some branches lead to us. Others end in silence. To them, Auranopithecus was one of those branches that ended. This back and forth debate reminds me of trying to solve a mystery with only a few clues. It's like finding footprints in the sand but not knowing where they begin or end. You can guess, you can argue, but the truth might always remain hidden. Still, the debate matters. Because it's not just about one ape. It's about the bigger question of where humanity truly began. For most of history, the answer was clear: Africa. All the strongest evidence pointed there. The oldest true human fossils like Australopithecus came from Africa. The earliest tools came from Africa. The genetic record of modern humans points back to Africa. But then came discoveries like Auranopithecus in Greece, or Grycopithecus in the Balkans, or even other apes in Europe and Asia. Each fossil whispered a different possibility: what if the very first steps toward humanity didn't happen only in Africa? What if the story began in more than one place, with apes exploring different paths, before one path finally succeeded? Of course, this idea is controversial. Some scientists warn against rewriting the story too quickly. They say we should be cautious, that just because an ape lived in Europe doesn't mean he was an ancestor of humans. Others argue the opposite, that ignoring fossils like Auranopithecus makes the story too narrow, too simple. Maybe the truth is richer, more complex than we imagine. When I think about these debates, I don't feel frustrated. I feel excited. Because it means the story of humanity isn't finished. It's still being written, not just in classrooms but in deserts, forests, and riverbeds where fossils lie waiting. I imagine a room full of scientists, their tables covered with fossil casts and drawings. One stands up, pointing at a diagram of a jawbone. "Look," she says, "the molars are too thick to belong to a gorilla. They resemble early human ancestors." Another scientist responds, "Yes, but the brow ridges are too heavy, too ape-like. This is no ancestor." Back and forth they go, their voices firm but respectful. In their debate, Auranopithecus lives on not just as a fossil, but as a question that refuses to die. What makes this debate even stronger is the mystery of migration. Did apes like Auranopithecus move south into Africa? Or did they stay in Europe until the climate pushed them out? If they did cross, that changes the story of our beginnings in a big way. It means Europe played a role in shaping humanity. But if they didn't, then Europe's apes are like echoes of what might have been, possibilities that faded before humans ever arrived. Another thing that fuels the debate is timing. Auranopithecus lived about 9 to 7 million years ago. That's important, because the split between humans and chimpanzees, the moment when our line separated from theirs, probably happened around 7 million years ago. That means Auranopithecus lived right at the edge of that crucial moment. He was there, alive, when the paths of apes and humans began to diverge. That makes him suspiciously close to the story. Too close to ignore. Even if he wasn't a direct ancestor, maybe he was part of the larger picture, a relative, a hint, a symbol of what was happening in that age. Life was changing. Apes were experimenting with new ways of living. Some tried and failed. Others adapted and carried on. Somewhere in that struggle, the human line emerged. And Auranopithecus might have been a witness to it all. I like to imagine him standing on a hillside in Greece, looking out across the land. The forests are thinner now. Grass sways in the wind. He doesn't know it, but far away in Africa, other apes are facing the same changes. Some of them will give rise to chimpanzees. Some to gorillas. And maybe, just maybe, one group will begin the long, winding journey toward humanity. Auranopithecus doesn't know this. He only knows hunger, survival, and family. But in his quiet steps, the echoes of our future may already be present. Sometimes I wonder what it feels like to be debated long after you're gone. Auranopithecus can't speak, can't defend himself, can't tell us who he really was. All he left were bones. Yet those bones carry enough mystery to make us argue for decades. It almost feels like he wanted it that way, as if his role was not just to live, but to challenge us to keep asking questions. And maybe that's the real gift of fossils. They don't give easy answers. They force us to wonder, to imagine, to piece together fragments into stories. They keep curiosity alive. And curiosity, I think, is one of the things that makes us most human. So whether Auranopithecus was truly our ancestor or just a distant cousin, his place in our story is secure. He is the question mark at the edge of history, the puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit but still matters. He reminds us that the origins of humanity aren't simple, that they may stretch across lands and ages in ways we don't yet understand. And as long as scientists keep debating, digging, and dreaming, the story of Auranopithecus will never fade. It will stay alive, carried not only in fossils but in the restless search for where we truly began. Sometimes I think about how much the earth itself decides the fate of living things. No matter how strong or clever an animal might be, if the land shifts, the rain stops, or the forests vanish, everything changes. And that's exactly what happened in the time of Auranopithecus. 9 million years ago, the world was moving towards something new. The Miocene epoch, which had been called the Age of Apes, was slowly drawing to an end. For millions of years, apes had spread across Europe, Asia, and Africa. They had thrived in warm, wet forests where fruits were plentiful and shade was endless. But now the climate was shifting. Rainfall became less steady. Summers grew hotter. Winters were drier. The thick forests that once stretched across southern Europe began to shrink. In their place came patches of woodland, scattered trees, and open grasslands. To us, it might not sound like much, but for apes who depended on fruit-rich forests, it was a huge change. Auranopithecus had to face this new reality. He couldn't count on soft fruits anymore. Instead, he needed to survive on tougher foods, roots, seeds, bark, or hard-shelled fruits that required powerful jaws to crack open. That's why his teeth were so big and strong, thick like tools built for survival. His body was adapting to a world that wasn't as easy as before. I picture him walking slowly through a dry woodland. The ground is dusty beneath his feet. The trees are spread apart, their leaves not as thick as they once were. He pauses by a low shrub, pulling at its tough branches, chewing leaves that don't taste sweet but at least fill his stomach. Around him, insects buzz in the heat. A river nearby is smaller than it used to be, its banks cracked from dryness. In the distance, strange shadows move, herds of grazing animals that have learned to live in open spaces. Auranopithecus watches them for a moment, then moves on, his family following close behind. This scene might feel quiet, but in it lies the heart of survival. To live in a changing world, Auranopithecus had to be flexible. He couldn't just do what his ancestors did. He had to eat new foods, explore new spaces, and take new risks. That flexibility is something humans would later inherit. The climate shifts of the late Miocene didn't only affect apes. They reshaped the entire animal world. New kinds of grasslands meant grazing animals like horses and antelopes began to spread. Predators followed them, learning new ways to hunt in open spaces. It was as if the earth was redesigning itself, forcing every creature to adapt or vanish. Many apes did vanish. Species that had once filled the forests of Europe slowly disappeared as their homes shrank. Auranopithecus was one of the last to remain in Europe. That makes him feel even more important. He was part of the final chapter of European apes, standing at the edge of survival while so many others faded away. But even though his world was tough, there's something inspiring about how he endured. He didn't give up when the forests thinned. He learned to make use of what was left. Maybe he traveled farther for food. Maybe his groups grew more careful, sticking closer together for protection. Maybe they even changed how they moved, spending more time on the ground than in the trees. We can't know for sure, but the fossils suggest he was built for resilience. And that resilience sounds very familiar. Humans, too, would later survive because we learned to adapt to harsh places. We learned to cross deserts, climb mountains, and sail across seas. We weren't the fastest or the strongest, but like Auranopithecus, we knew how to endure when the earth changed around us. I sometimes think of the late Miocene as a giant test. Nature was asking, which species can handle a world of less comfort and more challenge? Many failed. But the ones who survived like Auranopithecus proved that adaptability was the real key to survival. There's another layer to this story. Around 7 million years ago, when Auranopithecus was disappearing from Europe, the first signs of early human ancestors began appearing in Africa. Some scientists wonder if that's more than coincidence. Could it be that as Europe's climate grew harsh, some apes moved southward, crossing into Africa, and their descendants became the first proto-humans? It's a bold idea, and not everyone agrees with it. But if it's true, then the Earth's changes didn't just shape Auranopithecus, they shaped us. Without those dry summers, shrinking forests, and tough foods, maybe apes would have stayed the same. Maybe humans would never have existed. Imagine that, the roots of humanity lying not only in Africa but also in the shifting woodlands of Greece, where an ape with strong jaws once chewed bitter leaves and cracked hard nuts to survive. I imagine a family of Auranopithecus moving through their world at dusk. The sky glows orange. They gather near a tree for the night, huddling close for safety. The younger ones play, climbing branches, their laughter echoing through the air. The adults remain alert, listening for predators, scanning the land. They don't know it, but their struggle is part of something far larger. They are not just surviving for themselves, they are part of a chain of survival that stretches millions of years into the future. When I think about that, it makes me feel small but also connected. We often think of ourselves as separate from the past, but the truth is, we carry it inside us. Every time we adapt to something new, every time we face hardship and find a way through, we're echoing what creatures like Auranopithecus did long before us. The earth changed, and they changed with it. That's the lesson. Survival isn't about fighting against the world. It's about learning to bend, to adjust, to keep going no matter what. And maybe that's why Auranopithecus matters so much. He isn't just a fossil in Greece. He's a symbol of resilience. He reminds us that humanity's story didn't start with comfort. It started with struggle, with apes who learned to survive when the world grew difficult. Without them, there would be no us. As I tell this story, I realize the Earth is still changing today. Climate shifts, melting ice, rising seas, they are challenges we now face. And I wonder, will we remember the lesson of Auranopithecus? Will we adapt, like he did, finding new ways to live? Or will we forget that survival has always belonged to those who bend with the earth, not against it? The fossils don't give us those answers. They only remind us of the question. But maybe, just maybe, the secret of our survival lies in listening to the whispers of the past, in learning from an ape who once walked in the fading forests of Greece, when the Earth itself was deciding the future of life. Sometimes I wonder how strange it must feel to be a scientist, staring at broken bones and tiny pieces of teeth, and then trying to imagine a whole creature from them. That's what scientists do with Auranopithecus. He lived almost 9 million years ago, but all we have now are fossils. A jawbone here. A tooth there. Pieces of a face. Yet somehow, from these fragments, they rebuild an entire life. When I first saw pictures of his fossils in books, I thought they looked like old rocks. Just gray and cracked, nothing special. But then I read how scientists study every detail: the curve of a tooth, the thickness of a bone, the way the jaw fits together, and suddenly those dull rocks come alive. They whisper secrets about a creature who once walked the earth. Auranopithecus's teeth are especially famous. They're huge, thick, and covered in heavy enamel, much stronger than in many other apes of his time. Scientists say that means he ate hard or abrasive foods, things like nuts with shells, fibrous plants, or roots dug from dry soil. His world wasn't generous with soft, sweet fruit anymore, so he had to tough it out with what was left. His teeth are like little survival tools, telling us about his diet and the environment he lived in. His jaw is broad and strong, too. That suggests he had powerful chewing muscles. I imagine him sitting under a tree in ancient Greece, cracking a tough nut between his teeth, his face tightening with effort, his jaw working like a machine. Around him, younger apes might be watching, learning how to choose the right food and how to break it open. In that simple action, a whole way of life is passed down. But scientists don't just stop at teeth and jaws. They compare Auranopithecus to other apes, like modern gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans. When they do, they see both similarities and differences. His size, for example, was probably closer to a large chimp or a smaller gorilla. Some fossils suggest males might have been bigger than females, which hints at social behavior. If the males were larger, maybe they competed for mates, like gorillas do today. That opens up a whole new question: what kind of society did Auranopithecus live in? Did they form small family groups, like gibbons swinging through trees in pairs? Or did they gather in bigger groups, like chimpanzees, filled with noise, games, and arguments? The fossils can't tell us directly, but scientists can make guesses. I like to imagine them in small family bands. Maybe a dominant male, a few females, and their young. They might have moved together through the woodland, searching for food, always on guard for danger. The young ones probably played in the trees, learning how to climb, testing their strength, while the adults watched closely. Their calls would echo through the dry air: grunts, hoots, and cries that we'll never hear again but that once filled the Greek valleys. There's something amazing about how scientists put all these details together. It's like solving a giant puzzle where most of the pieces are missing. Each tooth, each bone is a clue. Put them together, and you get a sketch of a creature who lived millions of years before humans. Not a complete picture, never complete, but enough to feel his presence. Sometimes, scientists even look beyond the fossils themselves. They study the land where Auranopithecus lived. Layers of soil and rock hold pollen grains, fossilized plants, and even tiny shells of creatures that once shared his world. From those clues, they rebuild the environment. They see that Greece back then wasn't just forest but also patches of open land, rivers, and drier areas. That fits with the tough foods Auranopithecus had to chew. It's like building a time machine out of dust. And slowly, the past becomes real again. But here's the part that fascinates me most: Auranopithecus might not just be any ape. Some scientists think he could be close to the last common ancestor of humans and African apes. That means he might sit right near the branch where the human story begins. Others argue against it, saying he was just a European ape who didn't leave descendants. The debate goes on, with each new fossil adding fuel. I imagine the scientists sitting in a quiet lab, staring at his jawbone. One says, "This could be the start of us." Another shakes her head, no, he's only a cousin, not an ancestor. The truth remains hidden, buried in stone, waiting for more discoveries. And that mystery makes the story of Auranopithecus even more gripping. But what about his daily life, his habits, his dangers, his joys? For that, scientists look to living apes today. Chimps teach us about cooperation and tool use. Gorillas show us strength and family bonds. Orangutans remind us of quiet intelligence. Auranopithecus might have shared some of these traits. I picture him at dawn, climbing into the trees as the sun rises. He scans the land for food. A group of females sits nearby, grooming one another, picking through fur to clean away insects. A youngster clings to its mother's back, squealing as it tries to play. A large male sits apart, watchful, powerful, keeping order in the group. They move together, bound by trust and survival, just like families today. When night falls, they gather close again, high in a tree for safety. The youngsters curl up against their mothers. The male stays alert, listening to the distant calls of other creatures. The air cools, and the stars stretch above them, just as they do for us. In that moment, the gap of 9 million years feels smaller. Every fossil, every guess, every reconstruction pulls us closer to that ancient world. We may never know exactly what Auranopithecus was like. But the attempt to imagine him is powerful. It reminds us that history isn't just about kings and empires, it's about lives lived quietly, in forests and fields, long before humans ever built cities or wrote books. And maybe that's the real magic of piecing together a lost life. It's not only about science. It's about connection. It's about remembering that we come from a deep and ancient past, a chain of beings who laughed, played, suffered, and survived, just like us. When I think of Auranopithecus now, I don't just see a jawbone in a museum case. I see a living creature, a family moving across the Greek hills, a story unfolding in the dust of the Miocene. And I realize that even though the fossils are silent, our imagination gives them a voice. That voice tells us, we were here. We mattered. And maybe, just maybe, we are part of you. Sometimes, when I read about Auranopithecus, I feel a little sad. Not because he was strange or distant, but because he disappeared. One day, his kind walked through the forests and dry valleys of Greece, cracking tough nuts, grooming their young, and calling out to one another. Then, after thousands of years, they were gone. No more footsteps in the dust. No more voices in the trees. Only bones buried in rock. The question is, why? Scientists call this extinction. Every living thing faces it sooner or later. But the story of Auranopithecus's disappearance feels different. It isn't just about losing an ape, it's about losing a possible ancestor of humans. If he really was close to our family line, then his vanishing changes everything about how we think of our beginnings. So what happened? The world he lived in was already changing. The warm, wet forests of earlier ages were shrinking. The Miocene epoch, which had lasted for millions of years, was reaching its end. Climate shifts were turning lush green lands into drier, more seasonal places. In Greece, where Auranopithecus lived, the forests thinned out. Open woodlands and grasslands spread. For an ape that had adapted to tough foods, this was survivable, but maybe only for a while. I imagine a family of Auranopithecus moving through a dry valley. The sun is hot, the ground cracked. The trees that once offered shade and fruit are fewer now. The females climb up, searching for leaves and bark. The male cracks a nut, his teeth grinding hard against the shell. The youngsters tug at twigs, trying to chew but spitting them out. Their world is harder now. Food takes longer to find. Water lies farther away. Danger grows closer. At the same time, other creatures were rising. Early ancestors of baboons and macaques began spreading across lands. Smaller, quicker monkeys had a big advantage. They could move fast across trees and ground, eat a wide variety of foods, and survive in open spaces. Australopithecus, larger and slower, might have struggled to keep up. Some scientists believe competition from these monkeys pushed apes like Australopithecus aside. Where monkeys thrived in mixed environments, apes declined. Slowly, generation by generation, fewer apes survived. Babies might not have made it to adulthood. Adults might have starved in bad seasons. The numbers shrank, until finally, they were gone. But there's another possibility, one that feels almost like a mystery story. What if they didn't vanish completely? What if some of them moved? Some researchers suggest that apes from Europe might have migrated into Africa as the climate shifted. If Australopithecus, or a close relative, crossed back into Africa, they might have joined the ancestors of gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. In that case, Australopithecus's disappearance from Greece wasn't really an end, it was a journey. A crossing that kept part of his story alive in us. I like that idea. It feels less lonely. It means that even though his fossils are silent in Greece, his blood might still run in our veins. But of course, we don't know for sure. Fossils don't tell us every step. Sometimes they're missing altogether, leaving blank spaces in history. That's why debates still go on. Some scientists argue that Australopithecus was just a side branch of evolution, doomed to fade away. Others believe he was close to the common ancestor of humans and African apes. The truth lies hidden in the earth, waiting for another fossil to be found. What we do know is that around the same time Australopithecus disappeared, Europe's great apes faded too. Once, Europe was filled with many ape species: Dryopithecus, Grycopithecus, Oreopithecus. By the end of the Miocene, most were gone. In their place came new creatures, antelopes, deer, elephants with long tusks, and early horses. The world was shifting toward what we recognize today. Apes retreated to Africa and parts of Asia, where forests still offered shelter. When I think about this, I imagine Greece 9 million years ago as a stage where many different actors once performed. Australopithecus was one of the stars for a while. But then the scenery changed, the stage lights dimmed, and new actors took over. The ape's role ended. The play of life moved on. Yet something about extinction feels personal. Even though it happened millions of years ago, I feel a quiet grief when I imagine the last Australopithecus alive. Maybe it was a female with gray hair around her face, sitting under a fading tree. Her group was smaller than before. The calls of other apes were gone, replaced by the chatter of monkeys and the stomp of grazing animals. She looked around, but the world she knew was ending. Did she understand? Probably not. But she lived the moment of change. She was the last of her kind, though she never knew it. And here we are, 9 million years later, remembering her. That's the strange thing about extinction. For the ones living it, it's just life: another day of struggle, another search for food, another season of drought. But for us, looking back, it becomes the end of a story. A whole chapter closed forever. Still, Australopithecus is not truly gone. His fossils tell his tale. His teeth remind us of survival. His bones whisper of strength. And maybe, in ways we don't fully understand, he left a part of himself in us. Whether as a direct ancestor or just a cousin, he shaped the world that would one day lead to humans. So when people ask why Australopithecus matters, I think of this: he teaches us about change. He shows us that even strong creatures, even clever survivors, can disappear when the world shifts. He reminds us that evolution is not a straight path but a winding road, full of branches that sometimes lead to dead ends. And he tells us that our story is fragile. We, too, are part of nature's play, and one day, our role may end. But for now, we carry his memory. His fossils lie in museums, studied under bright lights, while children like me whisper his name with wonder. Auranopithecus. The ape from Greece. The one who may have begun our story or the one who almost did. Either way, he matters. Because without him, we would not know how deep our roots go, or how easily they can be lost.